The bus station bench felt cold beneath Noah's small body. The 3-year-old clutched his teddy bear tighter, his leg brace glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Daddy," he whispered to the empty platform. A woman in a tailored suit stopped mid-stride, staring at the abandoned child. Grace Watson had built an empire from nothing, but the boy's eyes, frightened, hopeful, reminded her of something she'd spent 20 years trying to forget. But before we discover what Grace does next, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Now, let me tell you how Keith Mendoza ended up making the most devastating choice of his life. 5 months earlier, Keith Mendoza's world had been completely different. "Careful with that saw, Keith," Marcus Chen, his foreman, called across the construction site in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Keith looked up from the oak planks he was measuring, grinning despite the sawdust covering his face. At 34, he was one of the best Finnish carpenters in the Philadelphia suburbs. His hands were skilled, his reputation solid, his work steady. The kind of man who could provide for a family. And he had one. A beautiful one. The October sun was warm on Keith's back as he worked. He glanced at his watch. 2:47 p.m. Eliza would be waking up soon. She worked the night shift at Jefferson Medical Center as a labor and delivery nurse, sleeping during the day while Keith worked. It wasn't ideal, their opposite schedules, but they made it work. They always made it work. They'd met 4 years ago in the strangest way. Keith's younger brother David had been rushed to Jefferson Medical when his wife went into premature labor. Keith had spent 12 hours in that waiting room, terrified for his brother's family. At 3 a.m., a nurse with kind green eyes and an exhausted but warm smile had brought him coffee. "Your brother's doing great," she'd said. "And the baby's stable. You can breathe now." That nurse was Eliza Martinez. Keith had asked for her number before leaving the hospital. She'd laughed and said, "Buy me breakfast first. I just worked a 14-hour shift." They'd gone to Murphy's Diner at 7 a.m., both exhausted, and talked until noon. Eliza told him about growing up in a Puerto Rican family in North Philly, about nursing school, about her dream of becoming a midwife someday. Keith told her about carpentry, about building things with his hands, about how every piece of wood had a story if you learned to listen to it. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. Eliza wore her grandmother's wedding dress. Keith wore a suit he'd bought at Goodwill and tailored himself. They had 23 people at the reception in the church basement, and it was the happiest day of Keith's life. Until 2 years later, when Eliza told him she was pregnant. Keith had been installing crown molding in a McMansion in Bryn Mawr when his phone buzzed. Eliza's text was simple. "Call me. It's important." His heart had seized. Important could mean 1,000 things, most of them bad. He'd called immediately. "Keith." Eliza's voice trembled with barely contained joy. "I'm pregnant." Keith had dropped his nail gun. It clattered on the hardwood floor, leaving a small dent. The homeowner, a snooty lawyer named Patricia, had started to complain, but Keith wasn't listening. "Say that again." "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby." Keith had apologized to Patricia, packed his tools in record time, and driven straight to Jefferson Medical. He'd found Eliza in the cafeteria during her lunch break. She'd shown him the positive pregnancy test, her eyes sparkling with tears of happiness. Keith had kissed her right there in the hospital cafeteria, not caring who saw. "We're going to be parents." "We're going to be parents," she'd echoed, laughing. Those 9 months were magic. Keith worked overtime, socking away every dollar he could. He took weekend jobs, side gigs, anything to build their nest egg. Eliza worked until she was 7 months pregnant, then switched to light duty at the hospital's request. Together, they transformed the spare bedroom in their modest Kensington townhouse into a nursery. Keith did most of the work himself. He stripped the old wallpaper, patched the walls, painted them a soft robin's egg blue. He built the crib by hand, oak, sanded smooth, with hand-carved details of clouds and stars. He made a changing table, a bookshelf, a mobile of wooden airplanes that hung over the crib, each plane carved with meticulous care. Eliza handled the soft things, blankets in shades of cream and blue, stuffed animals arranged on the shelves, a rocking chair she'd found at a yard sale and reupholstered herself. She washed and folded tiny clothes, onesies, socks smaller than Keith's thumb, hats that seemed impossibly miniature. On weekend evenings, they'd sit on their small porch, Keith's hand on Eliza's growing belly, talking about their son. They'd picked the name early, Noah. Eliza's grandfather had been named Noah. He'd been a carpenter too, coincidentally. Eliza said it was a sign. "He's going to be strong like you," Eliza would say, her hand covering Keith's on her stomach. "And kind like you," Keith would reply, kissing her temple. "And loud like your side of the family," Eliza would joke. Keith would laugh. "Hey, the Mendozas are passionate. There's a difference." They'd dream out loud about Noah's future, first steps, first words, teaching him to ride a bike. Keith would teach him carpentry. Eliza would read to him every night. They'd take him to the Philadelphia Zoo, to the Please Touch Museum, to the Italian market on Saturday mornings. They made plans the way young parents do, full of certainty and hope, and the innocent belief that love would be enough to weather any storm. But life doesn't always honor the plans we make. April 15th, the due date. Keith had been on edge for a week, jumping every time his phone buzzed. When Eliza's water broke at 2 in the morning, he was awake instantly. They'd practiced this. Hospital bag was packed. Car seat was installed. Route to Jefferson Medical was memorized. The drive took 12 minutes. Keith held Eliza's hand the entire way, trying not to let her see how terrified he was. This was it. After 9 months of waiting, they were about to meet their son. Jefferson Medical's labor and delivery floor was familiar to Eliza. Her co-workers greeted her with excitement and hugs. "Eliza, you're finally joining us on this side." Her friend Monica, another L&D nurse, got her set up in a birthing room. For the first 6 hours, everything was normal. Textbook even. Eliza's contractions were regular. Her cervix was dilating on schedule. She joked with the nurses between contractions, her sense of humor intact even through the pain. Keith stayed by her side, holding her hand, counting through contractions, feeding her ice chips. Monica checked on them regularly, pronouncing everything perfect. "You're doing great, Mama," Monica said during a check at 8 a.m. "At this rate, you'll be holding your baby by noon." But at 9:30 a.m., something changed. The fetal heart rate monitor started beeping irregularly. Eliza's blood pressure, which had been stable, suddenly spiked. Monica's expression shifted from relaxed to concerned in seconds. "Let me get Dr. Whitmore," she said, her voice calm but firm. Dr. Karen Whitmore arrived within minutes. She was 45, experienced, one of the best OB-GYNs at Jefferson. Keith had met her 3 times during prenatal appointments. She'd always been warm, reassuring. Now her face was professional and tense. She examined Eliza quickly. "We're seeing some concerning patterns. The baby's heart rate is decelerating during contractions. And Eliza, your blood pressure is too high. I want to monitor you closely." "Is Noah okay?" Eliza asked, her voice tight with fear. "We're watching him carefully," Dr. Whitmore said, which wasn't exactly an answer. The next hour was a nightmare of mounting tension. The fetal heart rate dropped further. Eliza's blood pressure climbed higher. "Doctor," Whitmore ordered medications, position changes, oxygen. Nothing helped. At 10:45 a.m., Eliza started bleeding. Not spotting, bleeding. The sheets turned red. Alarms started beeping. Monica hit a button on the wall, and suddenly the room flooded with people. Nurses, another doctor, an anesthesiologist. "Placental abruption," Dr. Whitmore said sharply. "We need to get this baby out now. Prep for emergency C-section." Everything happened too fast. They were wheeling Eliza toward the OR. Keith was being handed scrubs, told to change quickly. Eliza was pale, scared, gripping Keith's hand hard enough to hurt. "It's going to be okay," Keith kept saying. "It's going to be okay." But the look in Dr. Whitmore's eyes suggested otherwise. In the OR, they positioned Eliza on the table. A curtain went up at her chest so she couldn't see the surgery. Keith sat by her head, holding her hand, watching her face. She was crying silently, terrified. "I love you," Keith whispered. "We're going to meet Noah soon. Just hold on." Dr. Whitmore began the surgery. Keith couldn't see what was happening behind the curtain, but he could hear the urgency in the medical team's voices. Equipment beeped. Instruments clattered. Someone called for more blood. Then Dr. Whitmore's voice, sharp with alarm. "She's hemorrhaging. I can't control it." Keith's world tilted. "What?" "Uterine rupture," another voice said. "Bleeding is massive." Eliza's eyes met Keith's. "The baby," she whispered. "Save the baby." "Eliza, promise me, Keith. Promise me you'll save Noah." Dr. Whitmore appeared at Keith's side. Her scrubs were covered in blood. Her eyes were filled with something Keith would never forget. Desperation and sorrow, and the terrible knowledge of impossible choices. "Mr. Mendoza," she said quietly, pulling him aside, "we need to make a decision. Your wife is hemorrhaging. We can't control it. And the baby, he's not getting oxygen. His heart rate is critical." Keith couldn't breathe. "Fix it. Do something." "We're trying, but you need to understand. We may not be able to save both of them." Her voice was gentle but firm. "If the bleeding doesn't stop in the next few minutes, we have to prioritize. You need to tell me, your wife or your son?" The question shattered Keith's mind. How could any human being answer that? How could anyone make that choice? He looked at Eliza on the table. She was watching him, her face pale, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. The woman he loved more than his own life, his wife, his partner, his everything. And then he thought about their son, the baby they'd dreamed about, planned for, loved before ever meeting. The child Eliza had grown inside her body for 9 months, the life they'd created together. "I can't," Keith choked out. "I can't choose." "You have to," Dr. Whitmore said, not unkindly. "If you don't decide, we'll lose both of them." Keith looked at Eliza again. She gave the smallest nod. Her lips formed words. "Save him." Keith's tears came in a flood. "The baby," he whispered. "Save Noah." Dr. Whitmore's face was grim. She squeezed Keith's shoulder once, then returned to the table. Keith was ushered out of the OR. He collapsed in the hallway outside, his back against the wall, his body shaking with sobs. Monica found him there. She sat down next to him, her arm around his shoulders, and didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Time stopped having meaning. Keith sat in that hallway, seconds, minutes, hours, he didn't know. Other people passed. Somewhere a baby cried. Someone's happy ending, not his. At 3:47 p.m., Dr. Whitmore emerged from the OR. Her scrubs were still covered in Eliza's blood. Her face was exhausted, devastated. "Mr. Mendoza," she said softly. Keith stood. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. "Your wife didn't make it. I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but the hemorrhaging was too severe." The words hit Keith like bullets. Eliza was dead. His wife was dead. The woman he'd promised to grow old with was gone. "Your son is alive," Dr. Whitmore continued. "He's in the NICU. He's breathing on his own, which is a good sign, but there were complications from the oxygen deprivation. We won't know the full extent of the damage for a while." Keith couldn't process it. Eliza dead. Noah alive. Damage. "Can I see him?" His voice didn't sound like his own. "Of course." Dr. Whitmore led Keith to the NICU. Through the window, Keith saw his son for the first time. Tiny. 5 pounds, 4 ounces, tubes and wires everywhere. A ventilator helping him breathe. A nurse brought Noah to Keith in a private room. She placed the baby in Keith's arms with the wires and monitors still attached. Noah's eyes were closed. His little chest rose and fell. His tiny fingers curled around nothing. Keith looked down at his son and felt his heart break into pieces. "Hi, Noah," he whispered. "I'm your dad." Noah's eyes opened. They were green. Eliza's eyes. Keith started to cry. "Your mom loved you so much. She wanted to meet you so badly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry she's not here." He held Noah and cried until a nurse gently told him the baby needed to rest. They took Noah back to the NICU. Keith was directed to a room where they'd prepared Eliza's body. Seeing her was worse than anything Keith had ever experienced. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping, but she was cold and still and gone. Keith sat beside her body for hours. He held her hand. He talked to her. He apologized over and over for choosing Noah, even though she'd asked him to, even though it was what she wanted. "I don't know how to do this without you," he whispered. "I don't know how to be a dad alone." But Eliza didn't answer. She never would again. The next days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls and decisions Keith wasn't equipped to make. Funeral arrangements, hospital bills, birth certificate, death certificate. Noah stayed in the NICU for 8 days while doctors monitored his development. On day 3, Dr. Patel, the pediatric neurologist, gave Keith the news he'd been dreading. "Noah has cerebral palsy," Dr. Patel explained gently. "The oxygen deprivation during birth caused damage to the part of his brain that controls movement. It's affecting his left side, particularly his leg. He'll need physical therapy, possibly surgery as he grows. He'll likely walk with a limp and need assistive devices." Keith sat in the NICU consultation room, numb. His wife was dead. His son was disabled. And it was all because of the choice Keith had made. "Is he in pain?" Keith asked. "Not now. But as he grows, the muscle tightness may cause discomfort. That's why early intervention is so important." Early intervention meant physical therapy, which meant money, which Keith didn't have. The bills were already staggering. The emergency C-section, the hemorrhage management, Eliza's resuscitation attempts, the NICU stay. The hospital's billing department estimated $60,000 even after insurance, plus Eliza's funeral, plus ongoing therapy for Noah. Keith's savings account had $3,400. He made $42,000 a year as a carpenter. The math was impossible, but he didn't have time to think about money. He had to bury his wife. The funeral was on a grey, cold April day. Small. Eliza's parents flew in from Puerto Rico, her mother Maria sobbing inconsolably, her father Eduardo silent and stone-faced. Keith's family came, his mother Linda, his brother David, a handful of cousins. Eliza's nurse friends from the hospital attended, all of them crying. Keith stood at the grave with 5-day-old Noah in his arms, the baby wrapped in a blanket Monica had crocheted. He couldn't cry anymore. He was out of tears. He just felt hollow. After the burial, Eliza's parents approached him in the parking lot. Maria's face was red and swollen. Eduardo looked like he'd aged 10 years. "This is your fault," Maria said, her voice shaking with grief and rage. Keith recoiled. "What?" You chose that baby over our daughter. You killed her. She asked me to save him. You should have saved her." Maria's voice broke into sobs. "My baby is dead because of you." Eduardo put his arm around his wife. He looked at Keith with hard, cold eyes. "We don't want to see you again, or that child. You're not family anymore." They walked away. Keith stood in the parking lot holding Noah, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. The first month after Eliza's death was survival, nothing more. Keith's mother, Linda, flew up from Florida to help. At 68, she was battling arthritis and high blood pressure, but she wouldn't hear of Keith doing this alone. She moved into the townhouse's spare bedroom, the nursery Keith had built, and took over Noah's care during the day while Keith tried to work. But work was nearly impossible. Keith couldn't focus. His hands, usually so steady, shook. He made mistakes, bad measurements, crooked cuts. Marcus Chen, his foreman, was patient at first, then concerned, then frustrated. "Keith, I love you like a brother, but you can't keep doing this," Marcus said after Keith ruined a $400 piece of mahogany. "Take some time off. Get your head straight." "I can't afford time off." "You can't afford to keep working like this either." Keith took a week off, unpaid. He spent it in a fog, barely functional. His mother handled Noah, feeding, changing, soothing. Keith couldn't bear to hold his son. Every time he looked at Noah, he saw Eliza's dead body. He saw the choice he'd made. He felt the crushing weight of guilt. Dr. Patel had referred Noah to a physical therapist, Rebecca Torres. She came to the house twice a week to work with Noah, teaching Keith and Linda exercises to help with Noah's muscle development. Each session cost $200. Insurance covered some of it, not enough. The medical bills kept arriving. Collection agency letters started appearing in Keith's mailbox. His credit card was maxed out. His savings were gone. 6 weeks after Eliza's death, Linda sat Keith down at the kitchen table. "Mijo, I have to go home." Keith's heart sank. "Mum, I know, I'm sorry, but my doctor says my blood pressure is dangerous. I need to be near my cardiologist. And honestly, sweetheart, you need to figure out how to do this yourself. You can't keep avoiding your son." She was right. Keith knew she was right. But the thought of being alone with Noah terrified him. Linda left 2 days later. Keith drove her to the airport, Noah in the car seat in back. At the departure curb, Linda hugged Keith tight. "You're stronger than you think," she said, "and that boy needs you. Don't give up on him." Keith watched his mother disappear into the terminal, then drove home in silence. Noah made small cooing sounds from the back seat. Keith didn't respond. At home, Keith set Noah in the crib Eliza had helped furnish. The baby looked up at him with those green eyes, Eliza's eyes, and reached up his small arms. Keith turned and walked out of the room. He hired a babysitter, Martha Collins, a 65-year-old widow who lived 3 doors down. She was kind, experienced, affordable. $600 a month to watch Noah from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays. Keith added it to the growing pile of bills he couldn't pay. Work became Keith's escape. He took every job Marcus offered. He worked 60, 70-hour weeks. He came home late, exhausted, barely able to speak. Martha would hand him a sleeping Noah. Keith would put his son in the crib and collapse into bed. He avoided looking at Noah, avoided holding him longer than necessary, avoided connecting with him in any meaningful way, because connecting meant feeling, and feeling meant confronting the guilt that was slowly consuming him alive. Martha noticed. Of course she did. One Friday evening in June, she stopped Keith before leaving. "Mr. Mendoza, can I talk to you?" "Sure." Keith was exhausted. He just wanted her to leave. Noah is a sweet boy, but he needs more than food and diaper changes. He needs his father's love. Keith's jaw tightened. He's fed, he's clean, he's safe. That's not enough. Martha's voice was gentle but firm. He looks at you with so much hope every time you come home, and you barely look at him. That boy can feel your rejection, even this young. I'm doing my best. Are you? Or are you punishing him for something that wasn't his fault? Keith's hands clenched into fists. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Every time I look at him, I see my wife dying. Every time I hold him, I remember the choice I made. I chose him over Eliza, and because of that, she's dead and he's disabled. How am I supposed to just forget that? Martha's expression softened. You're not supposed to forget. You're supposed to heal, and you can't heal if you keep running from that child. He didn't ask to be born. He didn't ask for any of this. He's innocent, and he deserves a father who loves him, not one who can barely look at him. Keith's eyes burned with tears he refused to shed. I don't know how. Start small. Hold him when he cries. Talk to him. Look into his eyes. Let yourself feel something other than guilt. She put her hand on Keith's shoulder. You're not honoring your wife's memory by shutting out your son. You're just creating more tragedy. Martha left. Keith stood in the doorway, her words echoing in his mind. He walked to Noah's room. The baby was awake, lying in his crib, staring at the mobile of wooden airplanes. When Noah saw Keith, his face lit up. He reached his small arms toward his father. Keith's breath caught. He stood frozen in the doorway. Noah kept reaching. "Dada," he babbled. "Dada." It was one of his first words, and Keith had almost missed it. Something cracked in Keith's chest. He walked to the crib, picked up his son, held him close. Noah immediately relaxed into Keith's chest, his small head resting against Keith's shoulder. Keith could feel the baby's heartbeat, steady, alive. A miracle, really, considering everything. "I'm sorry," Keith whispered. "I'm so sorry, Noah. You deserved better than this, better than me." Noah just held on to his father and made small, contented sounds. Keith started to cry. Not the hollow, empty tears he'd cried at Eliza's funeral. Real tears. Grief and guilt and love all mixed together. For the first time since Noah was born, Keith let himself feel it all. It didn't fix anything. Keith still struggled to make ends meet. He still saw Eliza when he looked at Noah. The guilt still weighed on him. But it was a start. July brought another disaster. Henderson Construction filed for bankruptcy. 60 workers laid off. Keith's primary income stream vanished overnight. Marcus managed to keep Keith on for small side jobs, but the work was inconsistent. Keith applied to every construction company in the Philadelphia area. He called contractors he'd worked with, begged for jobs, but the economy was struggling. Construction had slowed. Everyone was cutting back. By August, Keith's savings were gone. His credit cards were maxed. His medical debt had been sent to collections. He was 3 months behind on rent. His landlord, Mr. Petrov, had been patient, but even patience has limits. Keith started selling things, his tools one by one. His truck, he bought an old Honda Civic for $800 cash. Eliza's jewelry, except for her wedding ring, furniture, the TV, anything that might bring in a few dollars. It wasn't enough. In September, Keith sat at his kitchen table at 2 a.m, staring at the pile of bills. Rent, $850, 3 months overdue. Electric bill, $340 overdue. Hospital bills, $63,000 in collections. Physical therapy, $1,600 owed. Rebecca threatening to stop sessions. His bank account balance, $89. Noah was 6 months old now. He needed formula, diapers, medication for the muscle spasms caused by his cerebral palsy. He was starting to outgrow his leg brace. A new one would cost $400 that Keith didn't have. Keith poured himself a glass of whiskey. Then another. The weight of everything was crushing. He couldn't breathe under it. From Noah's bedroom, the baby started crying. The leg brace hurt him at night when he moved. Keith got up, swaying slightly from the whiskey, and walked to the nursery. Noah was standing in his crib, holding onto the rails, tears streaming down his small face. When he saw Keith, his arms reached up desperately. "Dada, Dada!" Keith picked him up. Noah's small body molded against Keith's chest, his crying quieting immediately. He trusted Keith completely, depended on him absolutely, and Keith was failing him. "I can't do this," Keith whispered into the dark room. "I can't keep going like this. I'm drowning, buddy, and I'm pulling you down with me." Noah just held on to his father, content to be held. That's when the thought entered Keith's mind, the terrible, unforgivable thought. What if Noah would be better off without me? Keith hated himself for thinking it, but the thought took root. What if someone else raised Noah? Someone with money, resources, stability. Someone who could give him the therapy, the medical care, the future Keith couldn't provide. Someone who didn't carry the crushing guilt of choosing Noah over Eliza. The thought grew over the next weeks. Keith tried to push it away, but it kept returning, whispering in his darkest moments. "You're hurting him by keeping him. Look at him. He needs surgery you can't afford, therapy you can't pay for, a life you can't give him. Let him go. Let someone else save him." Keith started researching. Late at night, after Noah was asleep, he'd search online. Adoption agencies, foster care, safe surrender laws. Pennsylvania had a safe haven law. You could surrender an infant at a hospital, police station, or fire station with no legal consequences. But Noah was 6 months old. The law only applied to infants under 28 days. Still, Keith researched surrender procedures. What would happen if he left Noah somewhere safe? Would the state find him a good home? Would they make sure he got the care he needed? The rational part of Keith's brain screamed that this was wrong, that he was Noah's father, that Eliza would be heartbroken if she knew what he was considering. But the broken part, the part drowning in debt and grief and guilt, whispered that this was merciful, that Noah deserved better, that letting him go was the kindest thing Keith could do. On November 12th, Keith made his decision. He woke up with a clarity that felt almost like peace. Today was the day. Today he would give Noah the chance at a better life. He called Martha and told her he didn't need her today. She sounded concerned. Keith never took days off, but didn't push. Keith dressed Noah carefully. The baby's warmest clothes, a soft blue jacket Eliza had bought, tiny jeans, the dinosaur socks that were too big, but Noah loved. He packed a diaper bag with formula, diapers, wipes, and all of Noah's medical documentation, diagnosis, therapy records, medication list. He wrote a note on a piece of paper torn from a notebook. His name is Noah Mendoza. He is 6 months old, born April 15th, 2024. He has cerebral palsy affecting his left leg. He needs physical therapy twice weekly and may need surgery. His mother died in childbirth. I cannot give him the life he deserves. Please find him a family who can. Please take care of him. I'm sorry. Keith folded the note and put it in the diaper bag's front pocket. He looked around the townhouse one last time, the nursery he'd built, the kitchen where he and Eliza had cooked together, the porch where they'd talked about their future. That future was gone now, and Keith was about to make it final. He put Noah in the car seat. The baby smiled at him, that innocent, trusting smile that shattered Keith's heart every time. "Dada?" "Yeah, buddy, it's Dada." Keith's voice cracked. He drove to Center City, Philadelphia, to the Greyhound bus terminal on Filbert Street. It was busy on a Tuesday afternoon, people coming and going, enough chaos that a small child might not be noticed immediately, but would be found quickly. Safe. That was the important thing. Keith had to make sure Noah was safe. He parked in the garage attached to the terminal, carried Noah inside, the diaper bag over his shoulder. The terminal was loud, crowded, overwhelming. Perfect. Keith found a bench near the ticket counter, visible but not immediately in anyone's path. He sat down, placed Noah on the bench beside him, tucked the teddy bear, Eliza's teddy bear, the one her hospital friends had given Noah, into the baby's arms. Put the diaper bag next to him, the note visible in the front pocket. Noah looked up at Keith, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. "Dada?" Keith knelt down in front of his son. He looked into Noah's face, those green eyes, Eliza's eyes. The small nose, the gentle expression that was pure Eliza. The left leg with its brace, the physical reminder of the choice Keith had made. "I'm sorry, buddy," Keith whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I tried. I really tried. But I'm failing you. You need someone better, someone who can give you everything I can't." Noah reached for Keith's face, his small hand patting Keith's cheek. "Dada." Keith's eyes filled with tears. "I love you. I need you to know that. I love you so much. But I can't do this anymore." He stood up. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to stop, to pick Noah up, to take him home. But Keith forced himself to turn around, to walk away. Behind him, Noah started to realize what was happening. His babbling turned to fussing, then crying, "Dada! Dada!" Keith kept walking. Each step felt like walking through concrete. His hands shook. His vision blurred with tears. His chest felt like it was being crushed. He reached the terminal exit. The automatic doors opened. Cold November air hit his face. "Dada! Dada! Dada!" Noah's cries were desperate now, terrified. Keith could hear them even over the noise of the terminal. He stepped outside. The door began to close behind him, and he stopped. He stood on the sidewalk outside the Greyhound terminal, frozen. Cars passed on Filbert Street. People walked by, oblivious to Keith's internal crisis. Everything felt surreal, like he was watching his life from outside his body. Behind him, through the glass doors, he could hear Noah screaming, "Dada! Dada! Dada!" Keith closed his eyes. He saw Eliza, not dying in the hospital, but alive, laughing. The day they'd found out she was pregnant, her hand on her belly, her voice, "He's going to be strong like you." Strong. Keith wasn't being strong. He was running. He was taking the easy way out, just like he'd been doing for 6 months. Avoiding his son, avoiding his grief, avoiding everything painful because he couldn't face it. And Noah, innocent Noah, who'd never asked to be born, who'd never asked for cerebral palsy, who'd never asked for any of this, was about to pay the price for Keith's weakness. Eliza's voice echoed in Keith's memory, not from that night in the operating room, but from their wedding day. Her vows, "I promise to stand by you in hard times, to never give up on us, to always choose love, even when it's difficult." Keith had broken that promise. He'd given up. He'd let grief turn him into someone who would abandon his own child. But it wasn't too late. He could still choose love. Keith turned around. He ran back through the terminal doors. Noah was still on the bench, screaming, his face red and tear-stained. People were starting to notice. A security guard was walking over. A woman with a stroller had stopped, concern on her face. Keith ran to Noah. He grabbed his son, pulled him into his arms, held him tight against his chest. Noah's crying stopped instantly. His small arms wrapped around Keith's neck with desperate strength. He buried his face against Keith's shoulder and held on like his life depended on it. "I'm sorry," Keith sobbed into Noah's hair. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I won't leave you again. I promise, I promise." The security guard approached. "Sir, is everything okay here?" Keith looked up, his face wet with tears. "Yes, I'm sorry. I got confused for a moment. We're leaving." The guard looked skeptical but nodded. "All right, take care." Keith grabbed the diaper bag. He walked quickly back to his car, Noah clinging to him the entire way. He buckled Noah into the car seat, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the straps. Noah looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, as if nothing had happened, as if his father hadn't just almost abandoned him in a bus station. Keith sat in the driver's seat and broke down completely. He cried until he couldn't breathe, until his chest ached, until there were no tears left. When he finally caught his breath, he looked back at Noah. "I don't know how we're going to make it, buddy. I don't know how we're going to pay the bills or afford your therapy or any of it, but I won't give up on you again. I swear to God I won't." Noah made a small, happy sound and reached for his teddy bear. Keith started the car. He drove home through Philadelphia traffic, his mind numb, his heart broken open. He'd hit rock bottom. He'd come within seconds of abandoning his son. There was nowhere lower to go, which meant the only direction left was up. Keith didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change. Because standing in that Greyhound terminal, watching the entire scene unfold, was a woman in a tailored Armani suit. And Grace Watson had seen everything. Grace Watson had been having a terrible day. Her company's biggest client had just threatened to pull a $40 million contract over a software bug. Her CFO had called in sick, leaving Grace to navigate a budget meeting alone, and her town car had broken down, forcing her to walk 4 blocks in $800 heels to the Greyhound terminal to catch an Uber. At 40 years old, Grace had built Watson Technologies from nothing, a tech company specializing in cybersecurity software now valued at $200 million. She had 200 employees, offices in Philadelphia and New York, clients across 3 continents. She was powerful, successful, wealthy beyond what she'd ever imagined as a poor kid growing up in North Philly. And she was profoundly lonely. Grace was scrolling through emails on her phone, waiting for her Uber to arrive, when she heard the child crying. "Da, da, da, da!" She looked up. A small baby, maybe 6 months old, sat alone on a bench. He wore a blue jacket and had some kind of brace on his left leg. A teddy bear sat in his lap. A diaper bag was next to him, and a man, 30s, clearly distressed, was walking away from the child toward the exit. Grace's breath caught. She watched the man stop at the door, watched him stand there frozen, watched the baby's cries grow more desperate. Then the man turned around. He ran back, grabbed the child, held him like he was the most precious thing in the world, and sobbed. Something in Grace's chest cracked wide open. She recognized that look in the man's eyes. Desperation, crushing guilt. The feeling of being so broken that even breathing feels impossible. The terrible moment when you stand at a crossroads and have to choose between giving up or fighting. Grace had stood at that crossroads once, 20 years ago. She'd been 20 years old, a sophomore at Temple University, smart but struggling, working 2 jobs to pay tuition. She'd met a guy named Marcus, not important, not someone who mattered in the long run. They'd been together 3 months when Grace got pregnant. Marcus had disappeared the day she told him, literally, moved out of his apartment, blocked her number, vanished. Grace had been alone, terrified, with $400 to her name, and no idea what to do. She'd considered abortion, had made the appointment, sat in the clinic waiting room, but she couldn't go through with it. She'd considered keeping the baby, had imagined dropping out of school, working full-time, raising a child alone, but the math was impossible, so she'd chosen adoption. She'd given birth to a baby girl in April 1994 at Temple University Hospital. She'd held her daughter for exactly 10 minutes. Then she'd signed the papers and watched a nurse carry her away. Grace had never seen her daughter again. She didn't even know her name. The adoption was closed. She'd gone back to school, thrown herself into her studies as a way to cope, graduated with honors, got a job at a cybersecurity firm, worked obsessively, built her own company at 28, made her first million at 32, and she'd spent 20 years trying to forget the baby girl she'd given away, trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice, trying not to wonder if her daughter was okay, happy, loved. Now, watching this broken father hold his son, Grace saw herself. The same impossible choice, the same crushing guilt, the same moment of almost giving up. But this man had turned around. He'd come back. He'd chosen to fight. And Grace wanted to help him. She didn't think about it. She just followed. She reached the parking garage just as the man was buckling the baby into a car seat in a beat-up Honda Civic. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely manage the straps. His face was blotchy from crying. Grace approached carefully. "Excuse me." The man jumped, startled. He turned. His eyes were red, his expression devastated. "Can I help you?" Grace kept her voice gentle. "I saw what happened inside. Are you okay?" The man's face crumpled. No, I'm not okay." Grace looked at the baby in the car seat. The child had stopped crying. He was watching Grace with wide, curious green eyes, clutching his teddy bear. "What's his name?" "Noah. And you're his father?" "Yes." The man's voice broke. "I'm Keith Mendoza." Grace extended her hand. "Grace Watson." They shook hands. Keith's grip was weak, his palm sweaty. "I wasn't going to leave him," Keith said suddenly, defensively. "I mean, I was going to, but I couldn't. His voice failed. "I know," Grace said, and she meant it. Keith looked at her, surprised. "How could you possibly know?" "Because I've been there." The words came out before Grace could stop them. She never talked about this, never. But something about this moment demanded honesty. Not the same situation, but that feeling of being so broken you think walking away is the only option. "I understand that." Keith stared at her. "You don't look like someone who's ever been broken." Grace smiled sadly. "Appearances can be deceiving. 20 years ago, I gave my daughter up for adoption. I've spent every day since wondering if I made the right choice." Keith's eyes widened. "I'm sorry. I didn't. Don't apologize. I'm telling you because I want you to know. I see you. I see what you're going through. And I want to help." "Help how?" Grace pulled out her phone. "First, tell me what's happening. Why were you going to leave your son?" Keith hesitated. Then the words poured out. He told her about Eliza's death, the choice he'd made in the operating room, Noah's cerebral palsy, the medical bills, losing his job, the debt, the crushing weight of being a single father with no resources and no hope. Grace listened without interrupting. When Keith finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How much debt are you in?" she asked. Keith blinked. "What?" "Total. How much do you owe?" Why are you asking?" "Because I can help." "How much?" "About $63,000, mostly medical bills, but I also owe rent, utilities, physical therapy." "I'm going to give you my card," Grace said, pulling a business card from her purse. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., you're going to call me. We're going to meet, and we're going to fix this." Keith took the card, stunned. He stared at it like it might disappear. "I don't understand. Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Because 20 years ago, when I needed help, no one was there. I had to make an impossible choice alone, and I've regretted it every day since." Grace looked at Noah, still watching her with those innocent green eyes. "Maybe if someone had helped me, I could have kept my daughter. I can't change my past, but I can help you with yours." Keith's hands were shaking. "This is insane. You can't just... People don't do this." "I do." Grace's voice was firm. "Call me tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't make me hunt you down." She turned to leave, then paused. "Keith?" "Yeah?" "You're a good father. What you did today, turning around, coming back, that took more strength than walking away ever could. Don't forget that." Grace walked back toward the terminal entrance, her heart pounding. She didn't know why she'd done that. She didn't know this man. She didn't owe him anything. But something about seeing him choose his son had awakened something in her. Hope. The belief that broken things could be repaired. That maybe helping him and Noah would help her forgive herself for the daughter she'd given away. Her Uber was waiting. Grace slid into the back seat and gave the driver her address. As they pulled away from the terminal, she looked out the window and saw Keith still standing by his car, staring at her business card. She pulled out her phone and made 2 calls. First, to her accountant, "I need $70,000 liquid by tomorrow afternoon." Second, to her friend David Richmond, who owned Richmond Construction. "I'm sending you someone for a job. His name is Keith Mendoza. He's a Finnish carpenter. Hire him." Grace Watson didn't do anything halfway. If she was going to help this man and his son, she was going to do it right. Keith sat in his car for 30 minutes after Grace left, staring at her business card. Grace Watson, CEO, Watson Technologies. A phone number, an email address, an office address in Center City. He pulled out his phone and Googled her. Articles popped up immediately. Grace Watson, tech entrepreneur, named Forbes 40 under 40. Watson Technologies secures $40 million contract. How Grace Watson built a cybersecurity empire. She was real. This wasn't a scam. A literal multimillionaire had just offered to help him. Keith looked back at Noah. His son had fallen asleep in the car seat, his small chest rising and falling peacefully, the teddy bear clutched in his arms. "What just happened, buddy?" Keith whispered. He drove home in a daze, put Noah to bed, sat at the kitchen table with Grace's business card in front of him. Could he really call her, accept her help? It felt too good to be true. But what choice did he have? He'd already tried doing this alone. He'd nearly abandoned his son because of it. Maybe it was time to accept help, even from a stranger. The next morning at 9:55 a.m., Keith's hands were shaking as he dialed Grace's number. A professional voice answered. "Watson Technologies, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to Grace Watson. She told me to call." "May I ask who's calling?" "Keith Mendoza." There was a brief pause. "One moment, please, Mr. Mendoza." 30 seconds later, Grace's voice came on the line. "Keith, I'm glad you called. I still don't understand why you're doing this." "You don't need to understand. Just meet me. Murphy's Diner on Broad Street, noon today. And bring Noah. I want to meet him properly." "I can't afford a babysitter right now." "I said bring Noah. I want to see him." Before Keith could respond, Grace continued, "Bring all your bills too, every single one. Medical, rent, utilities, everything. We're going to deal with this." She hung up before Keith could argue. Keith stared at his phone. Then he looked at Noah, playing on the floor with building blocks. "Well, buddy, looks like we're having lunch with a millionaire." At 11:45, Keith dressed Noah in his best outfit. A small button-up shirt Eliza had bought, tiny khaki pants, and the dinosaur socks. He gathered all his bills into a folder. At noon, he walked into Murphy's Diner carrying Noah in his arms. Grace was already there, sitting in a booth by the window. She wore a navy business suit that probably cost more than Keith made in a month. When she saw them enter, she stood and smiled. "Keith, Noah." She gestured to the booth. "Please, sit." Keith slid into the booth, settling Noah on his lap. A waitress came over immediately. Grace ordered coffee and suggested a grilled cheese for Noah, glancing at Keith for approval. Keith nodded, too nervous to speak. "Let me see the bills," Grace said once the waitress left. Keith hesitated, then slid the folder across the table. It felt vulnerable, exposing the full extent of his financial disaster to a stranger. Grace opened the folder and began reading through each document methodically. Her expression remained neutral, professional. Keith watched her face, trying to gauge her reaction. Was she shocked, disgusted, regretting her offer? After 15 minutes, Grace looked up. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." She laid out a plan that left Keith speechless. She would pay off Keith's medical debt in full, $63,000, directly to the hospitals and collection agencies. She'd cover 3 months of rent to give him breathing room. She'd pay for Noah's physical therapy sessions up front for 6 months. She'd also cover the cost of Noah's new leg brace and any upcoming medical needs. "That's over $70,000, Keith said, his voice shaking. I can't accept that much money. You can, and you will, because Noah needs his father healthy and stable, not drowning in debt and desperation." Grace leaned forward. "But I have conditions." Keith tensed. Of course there were conditions. Nothing in life was free. What kind of conditions? "First, you accept this help without guilt or shame. This isn't charity. This is one human being helping another." Keith swallowed hard. "Okay. Second, you find a therapist and start processing your grief properly. You can't be the father Noah needs if you're carrying all that guilt." "I can't afford therapy. I'll cover it." "Next condition. You let me help you find stable employment. I have connections. I called a friend who owns a construction company. He's expecting you Monday morning for an interview." Keith's head was spinning. "Why are you doing all this?" Grace was quiet for a moment. She looked at Noah, who was happily making a mess with his grilled cheese. "I told you I gave up a daughter for adoption. What I didn't tell you is that I've spent 20 years building a fortune but feeling empty. I don't have family. I don't have children. I built an empire to forget, but it never worked." She met Keith's eyes. "When I saw you yesterday, when I saw you turn around and choose your son, even though it was the harder choice, I saw courage I never had. And I want to be part of that. I want to help you and Noah because maybe, in some small way, it'll help me forgive myself for the daughter I couldn't keep." Keith felt tears prick his eyes. "That's not your fault. You were young, alone, and you're drowning in grief and debt and trauma, yet you still chose to stay. That's extraordinary, Keith. I want to support that choice." "I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept the help. Say you'll give yourself a chance to be the father Noah deserves." Keith looked down at his son. Noah had grilled cheese smeared on his face and was grinning up at him. Da. "Okay," Keith whispered. "Okay, I'll accept the help." Grace smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Good. Now, my fourth condition. I want to be part of Noah's life, not as a replacement for his mother. No one could ever replace Eliza, but as a godmother figure, I suppose. Someone he can rely on, someone who cares about him." Keith was surprised by the emotion in Grace's voice. "You really want that?" "I really do, if you'll let me." Keith thought about it. Noah needed all the support he could get, and Grace seemed genuine, kind, invested. "Okay, yeah, I think that would be good." Noah chose that moment to reach across the table toward Grace, his small hand outstretched. Grace looked startled, then slowly reached out and took Noah's hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around her index finger. "Hi, Noah," Grace said softly. Noah smiled at her, that bright, innocent smile that lit up his whole face. "Hi." Something in Grace's expression softened. Her eyes glistened with tears. She blinked away quickly. He's wonderful, Keith. Yeah, he really is. They spent the next 2 hours talking. Grace asked about Noah's medical needs, his therapy schedule, his favorite things. Keith found himself opening up in a way he hadn't since Eliza died. Grace listened without judgment, without pity, just genuine interest and care. When they finally left Murphy's diner, Grace handed Keith a check. He looked at it and felt his knees go weak. $68,000, made out to him, signed in Grace's elegant handwriting. "This covers the medical debt, rent and therapy," Grace explained. "I'll wire additional funds for Noah's brace and other medical needs directly. And Richmond Construction is expecting you Monday at 8 a.m. David Richmond is a friend. He'll give you a fair shot." Keith stared at the check, his hands trembling. "Grace, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Just take care of that boy, and let me help when you need it. Deal?" "Deal." Grace knelt down to Noah's level. Noah was in Keith's arms, watching her with curious eyes. "I'll see you soon, okay, Noah?" Noah waved his small hand. "Bye-bye." Grace's smile was radiant. She stood, nodded to Keith, and walked to her town car waiting at the curb. Keith watched her drive away, then looked down at his son. "I think our luck just changed, buddy." Noah babbled happily and reached for his teddy bear. For the first time in 6 months, Keith felt something other than crushing despair. He felt hope. The next 3 months transformed Keith's life completely. The job at Richmond Construction turned out to be everything Keith needed. David Richmond was gruff but fair, a 60-year-old contractor who'd built his business from the ground up. He understood hard work and second chances. "Grace says you're good with finish work," David had said during the interview. "Show me." Keith had spent the day demonstrating his skills: crown molding, custom cabinetry, intricate trim work. By 4 p.m., David offered him a full-time position. $52,000 a year, health insurance, dental, 2 weeks paid vacation. You show up on time, do good work. We'll get along fine. Keith had accepted immediately, nearly crying with relief. The health insurance alone was life-changing. Noah's therapy sessions were now covered, his medications, future surgeries. Keith no longer had to choose between feeding his son and treating his medical condition. With the check from Grace, Keith paid off every debt. He walked into the hospital billing office with a cashier's check for $63,000 and watched them mark his account paid in full. The weight that lifted from his shoulders was almost physical. He paid his back rent to Mr. Petrov, who shook his hand and said, "Good to see you getting back on your feet, son." He paid Rebecca Torres for Noah's physical therapy. She cried when he handed her the check. "I was going to tell you we'd work out a payment plan," she said. "I wasn't actually going to stop treating Noah." "I know," Keith said, "but now you don't have to worry about it." The therapy was helping. Noah was making progress. At 7 months old, he could sit up on his own. His left leg was still weaker, but Rebecca was optimistic that with continued therapy and possibly 1 surgery around age 3, Noah would be able to walk independently. Grace became a constant presence in their lives. She stopped by Keith's townhouse once or twice a week, usually on her way home from work. She'd bring dinner, nice takeout from restaurants Keith couldn't afford, always with extra portions so Keith would have leftovers. She'd play with Noah, who adored her. She'd read him books in different voices, making him giggle. She'd help with bath time and bedtime routines. She'd sit with Keith on the porch after Noah fell asleep, and they'd talk. Keith told her about Eliza. Not just the tragedy of her death, but the beauty of her life, the way she laughed, her love for coffee ice cream, how she'd sing in the shower, the way she'd believed in Keith even when he didn't believe in himself. Grace listened to every story, never rushing him, never diminishing Eliza's memory. "She sounds amazing," Grace would say. "Noah is lucky to have had her as a mother, even for a short time." Keith also started therapy. Grace had connected him with Dr. Lisa Chen, a grief counselor who specialized in traumatic loss. Twice a week, Keith sat in Dr. Chen's office and worked through the layers of guilt, grief and trauma he'd been carrying. It was brutal. Some sessions left Keith emotionally wrecked for days, but slowly, painfully, he started to heal. He started to understand that Eliza's death wasn't his fault, that the choice he'd made in the OR was impossible, and he'd done the best he could. That Noah's cerebral palsy was a result of medical complications, not Keith's failure. Grief isn't something you get over, Dr. Chen told him. It's something you learn to carry differently. The weight never fully goes away, but you get stronger at bearing it. Keith was getting stronger. He could hold Noah now without being overwhelmed by guilt. He could look at his son and see not just Eliza's loss, but Noah's presence. A beautiful, happy child who deserved all the love Keith could give. By February, Keith and Grace had developed a rhythm. Grace would visit 3 times a week. She'd have dinner with Keith and Noah. She'd stay to help with bedtime. Then she and Keith would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. One evening in late February, after Noah was asleep, Keith and Grace sat on the porch despite the cold. Grace had brought hot chocolate. "Can I ask you something?" Keith said. "Of course." "Why haven't you ever tried to find your daughter?" Grace was quiet for a long time. "Fear, I suppose. What if I found her and she wanted nothing to do with me? What if she's angry that I gave her up? What if knowing her makes the guilt worse instead of better? Or," Keith said gently, "what if she wants to know you? What if she's been wondering about you the same way you've been wondering about her?" Grace looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I don't even know where to start." "There are agencies that help with adoption reunions. I could help you look into it if you want." Grace's hand found Keith's. "Thank you." They sat there, hands intertwined, and Keith realized something. He cared about Grace, not just gratitude for everything she'd done, real, deep affection. She'd saved his life, and Noah's, yes. But more than that, she'd become someone he genuinely enjoyed being around, someone who understood him, someone who made him laugh again, someone who made him feel, for the first time since Eliza's death, like maybe he could love again. He wasn't ready to act on those feelings. It was too soon, too complicated. But they were there, growing quietly in his chest. Grace seemed to feel it too. The way she looked at him sometimes, the way her hand lingered when they touched, the way she'd find excuses to stay longer at his townhouse. One evening in March, Grace arrived with a large wrapped box. "I got Noah something." Inside was a custom walker, padded, adjustable, covered in bright colors with cartoon dinosaurs. "Rebecca mentioned he's ready to start standing practice. This will help." Keith's throat tightened. The walker was expensive, probably $600 at least. "Grace, this is too much." "Nothing is too much for him." Grace's voice was firm. "Or for you." Keith looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who'd appeared in his darkest moment and refused to let him fall. "Grace, why are you really doing all this?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly? At first it was about my daughter. I thought if I could help you and Noah, maybe it would ease 20 years of guilt." "And now?" Grace met his eyes. "Now it's about you. Both of you. You've become important to me." "Important how?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Grace smiled softly. "But I know I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." Keith's heart pounded. "I care about you, Grace. A lot. More than I probably should, considering everything." "Don't," Grace interrupted gently. "Don't make this about what I've done or what you think you owe me. If you care about me, let it be because of who I am, not what I've given you." "It is," Keith said firmly. You're brilliant and kind and strong. You challenge me to be better. You make me laugh. You're amazing with Noah. And honestly, I haven't felt this happy since before Eliza died." Grace's eyes shone with tears. "I feel the same way. Being with you and Noah, it's the first time in 20 years I've felt like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They didn't kiss that night. It was too soon, too fragile. But they sat together on Keith's worn couch after Noah fell asleep, Grace's head on Keith's shoulder, and felt something precious growing between them. By June they were officially together. It happened naturally. Grace started spending more nights at Keith's townhouse, staying late until it made more sense to just sleep on the couch than drive home to her penthouse. Then she started bringing overnight bags. Then Keith cleared a drawer for her in his bedroom. They told Noah first, though he was only 15 months old and didn't fully understand. "Grace is going to be around a lot more, buddy," Keith explained. "Is that okay with you?" Noah, who adored Grace, clapped his hands. "Grace! Grace!" They made it official in July at a quiet dinner at Zahav, a nice restaurant in Old City. Grace reached across the table and took Keith's hand. "I want this to be real. I want us to be a family." "We already are," Keith said. "Then make it official. Move in with me." Keith blinked, surprised. "Grace, I have a penthouse with space we're not using. Noah could have his own room, a real play area. The building has security, a doorman. It's close to his therapy appointments. And selfishly, I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to be there for Noah's bedtime every night. I want this to be permanent." Keith's heart raced. "This is fast." "I know, but I'm 40 years old, Keith. I've spent 2 decades building a company and avoiding anything resembling a real relationship. I don't want to waste more time being cautious when I know what I want." Grace's eyes were intense, vulnerable. "I want you. I want Noah. I want us to be a family. If you're not ready, I understand. But if you are—" "I am," Keith said. "Yes, we'll move in with you." Grace's face lit up with pure joy. "Really, really, Noah deserves a stable home. And honestly, I want this too. I want to be with you." They kissed across the table, both of them crying happy tears. They moved in together in September, exactly 1 year after Keith had lost his job and nearly lost everything. Grace's penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Philadelphia skyline. An open kitchen with marble countertops. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a study. Keith had never lived anywhere so beautiful. But Grace made it a home. She let Keith bring his tools, set up a small workshop in the spare room. She helped him arrange Eliza's photos around the apartment, on shelves, on the mantel, tucked into bedroom corners. "She's part of this family too," Grace said. "Her memory deserves to be honored." Noah's room was a dream. Grace had hired a designer to create an adaptive play space, soft floors, grab bars at toddler height, toys specifically chosen for physical therapy purposes. But it was also fun, covered in dinosaur murals and filled with books. Noah, now 18 months old, was walking with his walker. His left leg dragged slightly, but he was mobile, independent. Rebecca said he was doing phenomenally well. They hired a part-time nanny, Carmen, to help during work hours. Grace adjusted her schedule so she could be home for dinner 5 nights a week. Keith worked steady hours at Richmond Construction, proud of the furniture and trim work he was creating. They fell into a routine. Breakfast together. Grace and Keith heading to their respective jobs. Carmen watching Noah during the day, taking him to therapy. Everyone home by 6 p.m. Dinner as a family. Noah's bath and bedtime routine, with both Keith and Grace participating. Then quiet evenings together. It was peaceful. Normal. The kind of life Keith had thought was impossible a year ago. One evening in December, Keith was in his workshop building something when Grace came home. What are you making? An adaptive table for Noah. Rebecca said it would help with his hand-eye coordination as he learns to eat independently. Grace watched Keith work, careful, skilled, pouring love into every measurement. You're an incredible father. Keith looked up. I wasn't always. But you are now. That's what matters. Keith set down his tools. Grace, I need to tell you something. Okay. I love you. I'm in love with you. And I need you to know that you didn't just save Noah's life. You saved mine. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had nothing left. Grace kissed him, cutting off his words. I love you too, both of you. You and Noah are my family. That night, after Noah was asleep, Keith pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple ring, not expensive but beautiful, a platinum band with a small sapphire. I know we've only been together officially for 6 months, Keith said, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Grace Watson, will you marry me? Grace looked at the ring, then at Keith. Tears streamed down her face. Yes, God, yes. 1,000 times yes. They were married in March at the penthouse in a small ceremony. 20 people attended. Keith's family, Grace's close friends from work, Noah's medical team who'd become like extended family. Noah, now 2 years old and walking independently with only a slight limp thanks to recent surgery, served as ring-bearer. Carmen had helped him practice for weeks. He took his job very seriously, walking slowly down the makeshift aisle with the rings on a small pillow, his face scrunched in concentration. When he reached the front and successfully handed the rings to Keith, everyone applauded. Noah grinned and took a bow, which made everyone laugh. Grace's vows included a promise to Noah. I will love you and protect you and be the best mother I can be. Not to replace the mother you lost. No one could ever replace Eliza. But to honor her memory by making sure you know you are cherished every single day. Keith's vows to Grace were simple but profound. You appeared when I needed you most, like an angel in a bus terminal. You showed me that broken things can be healed, that dark times don't last forever, and that love comes when you least expect it. I will spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made us. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. 5 years later, Keith stood in the backyard of their new house in the suburbs. Grace had insisted on buying a place with a yard for Noah. He needs space to run, to play, she'd said. They'd found a beautiful colonial in Radnor with a big backyard, a tree for climbing, and enough room for Noah to ride his bike. Noah was 7 years old now, tall and energetic. His limp was barely noticeable. He still wore a small brace at night to prevent muscle tightening, but during the day he ran, jumped and played like any other kid. Right now he was kicking a soccer ball across the grass. It rolled a bit lopsided due to his weaker left side, but he was playing, laughing, living. Dad, look. Noah kicked the ball harder, and it actually went straight. Keith's heart swelled with pride. Great job, buddy. Grace came outside, carrying lemonade. She was 45 now, a few silver strands in her dark hair that she refused to dye. He's getting good. He really is. Keith pulled Grace close, his arm around her waist. They watched their son play. Grace leaned into Keith's side, content. I never thought I'd have this, Grace said quietly. A family, a home, this kind of happiness. Me neither. Especially after Eliza died. I thought my life was over. Grace looked up at him. Do you ever think about that day at the bus terminal? Every day. Do you regret it? Keith thought about the question carefully. I regret that I got to that point. I regret not asking for help sooner, not processing my grief better, letting myself get so broken, but I don't regret what happened after, because it brought me to you. It brought us here. Noah ran over, breathless and grinning. Mum, did you see? I kicked it straight. Grace's face softened at the word Mom. Noah had started calling her that about a year ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. It never failed to make Grace's eyes water. I saw, baby. You were amazing. Noah hugged Grace, then Keith. I love you guys. We love you too, Noah, Keith said, pulling his son close. As they stood there in their backyard, Keith, Grace and Noah, the evening sun casting everything in golden light, Keith thought about Eliza. He hoped wherever she was proud of him, proud that he'd kept going, that he'd given Noah the life he deserved, that he'd found love again. He hoped she knew that Noah learned about her regularly. They had photos of Eliza throughout the house. On Noah's 7th birthday, they'd visited her grave, and Keith had told Noah stories about his birth mother, how brave she was, how much she loved him, how she'd sacrificed everything so he could live. She's watching over you, Keith had told Noah at the grave. Always. Grace took Keith's hand now, pulling him back to the present. What are you thinking about? How lucky I am, how lucky we all are. We are lucky, but it's more than luck. You chose this, Keith. You turned around that day. You chose Noah when it would have been easier to walk away. That wasn't luck. That was love. Noah laughed as a butterfly landed on his hand, marveling at the delicate wings. Keith pulled Grace and Noah into a hug, holding his family close. I love you both so much. We love you too, Grace whispered. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we never knew we needed. Sometimes, when we're at our absolute lowest, a stranger appears and becomes family. Keith Mendoza had been saved by Grace Watson, but in saving him, Grace had saved herself too. She'd found the family she'd thought was impossible, the love she'd thought she didn't deserve. They'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something bright and lasting. That's what love does. It finds you when you least expect it. It lifts you when you're too broken to stand. It gives you hope when hope seems impossible. And it stays. Because real love, the kind that saves you, transforms you, makes you whole, doesn't give up. It turns around. It comes back. And it builds a family from broken pieces, creating something more beautiful than what was lost. Keith, Grace and Noah stood together in their backyard as the sun set, a family forged from tragedy and hope, bound by love that refused to quit. And they were home.